BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Okay, today is not actually Monday, today is Thursday. Welcome to this bonus Zodiac Killer news report for this week. And the reason why this episode is coming out on Thursday in place of the normal show, True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, is it was actually requested by some of you guys as a response to the most recent Zodiac Monday that came out. And I also wanted to talk to you guys about some follow-ups that have been happening with the Zodiac Killer mystery. And firstly, thank you to everyone who did listen to the shorter Zodiac Monday episode that came out. And I also just want to say thank you to everyone who puts up with me, even if there are some technical difficulties and so on. Firstly, the Zodiac Killer was a serial killer that operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And in this episode, I want to talk about some of the comments that you guys have left on some recent episodes. I want to talk about some of the Zodiac Killer news, as well as combining some things from the Thursday shows, which are called True Crime Talk Radio in the morning here on BBOR. And firstly, if you want to follow along with all of these true crime discussions, you can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer or any other true crime case that's being discussed. Normally on the Thursday show, I begin with something that's called the Crime Talk points. They're things that I hear about on the show Crime Talk, which I'm a daily listener to. And I'm going to start with some here, and there'll be more at the end. But the first one, I think, is very relevant to the Zodiac Killer mystery, because the Zodiac has never been identified. And the host of Crime Talk said something that was really eye-opening in regards to cold cases. The easiest way to get a conviction is through a defendant's own words. But that's in the courtroom. First, to solve the cold case, how do you get the arrest? How do you identify the right suspect? And what he said was, nobody can keep a secret. Absolutely nobody. Somebody will either tell someone or leave something behind, writing something in a journal, maybe a deathbed confession, maybe exposing a piece of evidence. Nobody can keep a secret. If somebody is responsible for something, they're going to eventually slip up and let it out into the open. Or if you look at it in a different way, somebody probably knows something along the way. And this really begs a lot of questions about the Zodiac Killer. Does somebody know the Zodiac Killer's identity? Does somebody know who the Zodiac Killer is and is currently alive? Even if the Zodiac Killer has passed away, does somebody know everything and they're the ones who are staying silent? But we have to remember that statement. Nobody can keep a secret. Eventually, maybe they will crack and they will share something in some ways. And do you guys agree with that? Firstly, can I just ask, do you guys agree with that statement that nobody can keep a secret? Even though I've said some very passionate things about it already, I don't. And I'm sure that there are some exceptions out there. I'm sure there's some people who can just bury it down, or also what happens with individuals who have sociopathic and psychopathic tendencies. They get locked into a story, and then they just start playing the part until the day they die, and they will never crack, because they don't want to, and they don't feel anything, they don't feel any pressure to keep the secret. And even if they're not psychopaths or sociopaths, I still think there could be people in the general public who would be extremely tight-lipped. They might enjoy keeping the secret to themselves because they know the truth and nobody else does. So, I mean, I'm on board with that statement about 80%. Let's not kid ourselves. There's an enormous amount of truth in that statement that nobody can keep a secret, but the 20%, I think, would show that there are actually going to be a lot of people who would probably really want to savor the moment of knowing the truth and no one else would ever find out. They're going to go to their grave with a smile on their face in the most twisted way. But the Zodiac Killer was a different type of serial killer. The Zodiac didn't only commit murders, he also wrote letters, designed ciphers and cryptograms and greeting cards and diagrams. And you guys may have noticed that I've been talking a lot about the Zodiac Killer ciphers lately, and I'm going to talk more about them in this episode. And I had a comment come in from Until Tomorrow 9, who actually called me out on something from the last episode, and that was that if we were able to identify the Zodiac Killer, why would you continue to look at the Zodiac Killer ciphers? And I'm paraphrasing that one, but let's phrase the question in a different way. If we know the identity of the Zodiac Killer, is it worth exploring the solutions to the Zodiac Killer ciphers? Because there are still two confirmed Zodiac ciphers that have not been solved, the Z13 and the Z32. And my answer is, yes, absolutely, I would continue to explore them. Absolutely, I would continue to look for solutions for one single reason. It would be easier. It would be so much easier to try and solve the ciphers if we knew who the Zodiac was. Say, for example, the Z13 cipher is called the My Name Is cipher, and you would already know what name you're looking for, and you might not get it. Maybe the Zodiac put something else into the cipher that is not his exact name, but absolutely I would try and explore different possibilities. I would expect in about one day, all of us, whoever you are listening to this show, would probably be able to get some type of answer about combining symbols that would reveal the Zodiac Killer's name. If you knew what name to look for, you could rearrange the symbols to get a desired result. Sure, but you could also find out other elements of the cipher. Maybe this is how he would have altered his name to put it in the cipher. I just think that it would be easier. The Z32 would be a little bit more complicated because that's about the location of a bomb as opposed to the Zodiac Killer's legal name, or some people think that it's the Zodiac Killer's address that he's hiding there. But still, you'd have more information to work with. And I know, it's extremely difficult to verify the Z13 and the Z32, but if you knew the killer's identity, then it would be easier to solve the ciphers because you would have more to work with. But what do you think? You can also respond to that challenge question. If we ever did learn the identity of the Zodiac Killer, would you still want to solve the Zodiac ciphers, or do you think that it's not worth it at that point because everything's about knowing the identity of the killer? And there's also a book that I've been talking to you guys about recently on the Zodiac Killer news reports, and it's called Zodiac Killer Fact versus Fiction by John Bowman. And if you ever do read this book, it has a lot of different facts about the Zodiac Killer case and also misconceptions that people have about the Zodiac Killer mystery, and that's the way that it's written. This is a book that is not written in paragraphs. It is literally just one fact on one page and one misconception on the same page. And one of the misconceptions that has been identified by John Bowman in the book Zodiac Killer Fact versus Fiction is that there is no piece of evidence that links the crime scenes. In fact, I'm going to pull it up right now. The claim is, there is matching evidence between multiple crime scenes, and the response is that this is not true. So I think that this is mostly an accurate statement. I mean, I don't dispute that. I've actually been talking about this for years here on Black Box Online Radio, about how there is very little physical evidence. And one of the things that I've gathered over the years, because of looking at the Zodiac Killer mystery as well as the Jack the Ripper mystery, is I think the Zodiac Killer targeted the victims at random, or at the very least, I think the Zodiac was not targeting people that he had very strong personal connections to. I take it back, not at random, because I don't know that really, but I don't believe the Zodiac had close personal connections to the majority of the victims, not like revenge killings, or that this is the person who gave him the brush-offs in high school, and he's just so mad at that girl because he has an obsession with her. I don't think the Zodiac worked like that. I think he targeted the victims because of convenience. I think he did this because of some it's convenience. It's getting them in vulnerable places and going after people who are in vulnerable places. But the lack of personal connections also means that it's harder to backtrack. And the Zodiac was also very careful when he was committing these crimes, doing things like wearing gloves. He even left shell casings behind at crime scenes, and people don't seem to be able to extract a large amount of evidence from that. So yes, mostly I agree with that statement, that there is not an enormous amount of physical evidence that is connecting the crime scenes, or just that the physical evidence that is connecting the crime scenes is very weak. Now, there is abstract evidence that does connect the Zodiac Killer crime scenes, and you guys know all this, so I'll be very brief. For example, the Zodiac openly said that he was the murderer of all of these people. He took credit for the Lake Herman Road murders and the Blue Rock Spring shooting in a letter. His first letter provided details that only he and the police knew. He took credit for all three, he took credit for 3 homicides in the Lake Berryessa incident when he wrote a message on the car door that listed 3 dates of Zodiac activity: December 20th for Lake Herman Road, July 4th for Blue Rock Springs, and September 27th for the Lake Berryessa stabbing. And then he wrote a very detailed letter after the murder of Paul Stein, and he also could have possibly alluded to Lake Berryessa when he said that he was responsible for the murders in the North Bay. I mean, that is evidence. That is evidence, but it's not physical evidence. And the Zodiac is also just trying to do other things to prove that he committed the crimes, like mailing in pieces of Paul Stein's bloody shirt. He's trying to prove that he is the murderer. But let's go back to this point from John Bowman. How do we actually solve the Zodiac Killer mystery if there is not an enormous amount of physical evidence uniting the crime scenes? What this is talking about is they don't have the perpetrator's DNA at every single crime scene. They don't have the perpetrator's fingerprints at every single crime scene. What I'm hoping for is that greater forensic analyses will be able to look at things like maybe they have a fragment of a fingerprint here and a fragment of a fingerprint there. And they can put the fragments together the same way that someone would put together pieces like a jigsaw puzzle, and that would reveal something about, okay, even if you have one solid fingerprint that could be put into a database, and then this could be used to identify somebody, most likely the killer, though. And I also want to come back to something else, though, that I heard from Crime Talk, though, because it was all about the investigations into crime scenes and the procedures that should be used. Procedure number 1 should be eliminate all officers that don't need to be at the crime scene because of the risk of contamination. Procedure number 2, document all the officers that do need to be at the crime scenes and then collect fingerprints for contamination comparisons, as well as people like paramedics. Everybody should be listed, documented, and they should know absolutely every person who could be touching a surface, who could be handling something. Now, was that done back in the 1960s when the Zodiac Killer was operating? I don't think so. I really don't think that they were that careful. And that's another reason why the Zodiac Killer was able to get away with all this, because the evidence was not properly preserved, and they also were completely unaware of things like DNA, which is just another reason why the Zodiac was able to get away with this. And it's very saddening. It's absolutely saddening. But what do you think about the statement that I made that maybe they'll be able to take partial pieces of a fingerprint, put it together like a puzzle, and then use that to possibly identify the Zodiac Killer? Do you agree or disagree with that statement? You can put your ideas in the comment section down below, and, I, of course, would love to read them. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com, and that is a great way to keep in touch. The next thing I would like to do is to keep going with the book, The Only Time That Richard Got Angry With Me, and this is written by James Big Twin. And I was discussing this on the Monday show, and Tom Voigt of ZodiacKiller.com actually responded in the comment section by saying that this book is poorly researched because there was a fact that I was reading from the book that he wanted to challenge, and that was in relation to Richard Gaikowski's newspaper, The Good Times. Richard Gaikowski is perhaps the second most widely discussed Zodiac Killer suspect out there after Arthur Lee Allen, but a big difference between Gaikowski and Lee Allen is that I want to like Richard Gaikowski, and I don't want to like Arthur Lee Allen. No, I mean that. Arthur Lee Allen was a terrible person. He was a child molester. He was an abuser and a manipulator. And the reason why I said I wanted to like Gaikowski is that there's a section here in the book, The Only Time That Richard Got Angry With Me, and it's called Richard the Filmmaker, and I'm just going to read something very briefly. Richard started making films while he was at the Good Times. He directed one called My Black Movie, or the full title, is This Is My Black Movie, and it is a 6-minute short film made in 1970. The film is described as a dreamlike set of scenes of a young woman seducing a man intercut with images of spiders' faces and skulls. And I'm like, oh my goodness, dude, I want to hang out with this guy. In 1972, Richard's name also appears in a telephone directory, and then Richard is operating the Storefront Cinema at 14th Street and Guerrero Streets. The 1980 San Francisco Free and Easy Guy described him as described a film that he made as a clandestine scene that ran 18 months before the cops shut it down, and that of course is referring to running at his theater. In 1973, Richard made Drummer, a film that was interspersed with sequences of an artist making a clay drummer with footage of drummers on the street in San Francisco and in Golden Gate Park. And even though that is hardly not on par with the Black Movie, I would like to see that one too. That one actually sounds like it's very artistic. And now, before some of you chew my head off, I completely admit that Gaikowski was probably up to some pretty bad things. He was probably interacting with people who were up to pretty bad things. I don't necessarily know if I would actually be friends with Richard Gaikowski. He seemed to have some instability issues, and I think that goes without saying. It's just in terms of creative developments, both of these films that have been discussed and running the storefront theater also just seem like some very interesting pursuits. And overall, though, I think a lot of us would admit that Richard Gaikowski had a fascinating life story, even if he turns out not to be the Zodiac Killer. If he does turn out to be the Zodiac Killer, then I probably wouldn't care at all about his creative pursuits if he actually were convicted beyond a reasonable doubt, because it would get to the point where you have to admit, you're a murderer, I don't care what kind of movies you liked. And moving on to the next segment here on the Zodiac Killer News Report, I am still going with the story of Galina Trefil, who is accusing her father, John Charles Trefil, of being the Zodiac Killer. Now, I can tell how you guys are responding in the comment section. Some of you are thinking, this is a dead end, there's no reason to talk about this. This is just another My Daddy Was the Zodiac Killer story. And I openly said, if she didn't have arranged her story in the way that she did, I probably would have devoted 3 minutes to it and never spoken about it again. The difference is that Galina Trefil has claimed that she has extracted confessions from her father about his crimes, that not only was he the Zodiac Killer, he was also the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer, and he committed murders all across the United States and the world. Now, on her own personal YouTube channel, Galina released audio recordings of conversations with her father, and to be very honest with you, I was horribly disappointed, because in the first one, I couldn't make it through because you could not hear her father talking. Firstly, it's audio only, and she only put a black box on the screen and was talking with just the black box up there, and I was a little bit infuriated because that was my idea. Sorry, Galina, already been done. No, I wasn't the first person to do that. That's actually why I call the channel Black Box Online Radio, but I started this channel in that format because there were other videos that were made like that on YouTube. But I digress from that. Still, Galina, I did it first, me before you. But more importantly, she's playing these audio interviews with her father, and she's asking him questions, but you couldn't hear his responses at all. And I turned the closed captions on. I also have a fair amount of patience when it comes to listening to audio clips over and over again, and I just couldn't hear anything that he was saying. So this also brings up another point about how Galina openly told law enforcement that she was going to go with a wire to get confessions out of her father for law enforcement using their equipment. And I'm just thinking, well, if you can't hear anything on his side, then what's the point? But the second reason why I want to talk to you about her story is there was a response that was made by the YouTuber Trent James, and he is a YouTuber that I haven't heard of before. And he was actually given Galina's story as a request to talk about because he works in the entertainment industry in Los Angeles, but he is a former member of Mendocino County's police department. He's a former cop from Mendocino County, so people wanted his response. And I'm going to play a clip from that. And firstly, I have to give credit to Trent James. He has an excellent introduction. It was very, very different than what I was expecting for this true crime video. And there's going to be a jump cut in there where I get straight to the parts about the Zodiac Killer. But then I'm going to play Trent's response to Galina Trefil's claims that John Charles Trefil was the Zodiac Killer, and then I'll give my take on the subject.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. It is your host, Trent James, and I hope you are all doing well. I apologize for this article if I've ever heard of this woman or her father, since I was a cop in Mendocino County and I started in law enforcement not long after she started to report these murders. So no, I've never heard of her. I've never heard of her father or these homicides at all. I checked with two of my friends prior to uploading this video. Actually three, two of which used to work in Fort Bragg at the police department there during that time. Neither one of them have heard of her or her case, and neither of them are in law enforcement anymore. And then my other friend, who was working at the sheriff's office in Mendocino County during that time, and he didn't hear anything about it either. So I don't know. Saw on Facebook that somebody commented on her post and made a reference to the Zodiac Killer. I'm not going to get into the Zodiac Killer, but he was a serial killer during, I forgot what years, I think it was like the 60s or 70s or something, mainly in the North Bay area. And someone had compared her father, Dr. John Trefil, his photograph to a sketch of the Zodiac Killer, the original sketch of the Zodiac Killer. Very similar, eerily similar, as Robin Murgatroyd, sorry about that, pointed out. So here's the thing. As I stated, I've never heard anything about this. Okay, but my first thought, right, and the thoughts of the other three prior law enforcement people that I spoke to that were working at the Fort Bragg Police Department or at the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, you know, back at 2012 when she first started to report these things. My first question is, why is nobody looking into this, right? Like, so she claimed that that law enforcement informed her, hey, we have more, our current cases that are active. I'm sorry to tell you, Glinda, but they're going to be more important right now than a cold case. Yeah, your dad might have killed 12 people or more, but that's really not our concern at the moment. Now, I do have a hard time believing that. And basically, anybody that knows me or watches my channel, I am the first person to call out bad policing, misconduct, corruption, especially in Mendocino County, right? But that just kind of doesn't add up. I'd like to know more about this. Like, why did she report it to all of these law enforcement entities? And why did her father, according to her, gave very lengthy interviews with the DA's office there, and just no one gave a shit? That's very odd. I mean, I know that the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, the people that...
And one more time, that was from Trent James, a former cop from Mendocino County, and I think that he is really onto something when he talks about the way that Galina is presenting her story, and he says that this should not be police procedure. When he'll expand upon this later in the video, you can hear it on the YouTube channel Trent James, but he just says this is not police procedure. If somebody comes to them and they say that, number one, that their father has confessed to being a serial killer, then a police officer should go to the house and interview him and find out what's going on. Number two, if John Charles Trefil is still alive, which he is alive, then the police officer should interview him, and if he actually is doing what Galina is saying that he wants to do. I mean, her whole reason for doing this, by her own admission, was her father was on his deathbed and he's made these confessions and he wanted her to put this information out into the public, and that he wanted this stuff to come to light. Nobody can keep a secret, right? Right? Okay, so then he is confessing to this stuff. Then that, if he's telling them where the bodies are buried, and if he is telling them what kind of crimes he committed, then the police officer should then go out to the location where they claim the bodies were buried. They should investigate that area. They should find the evidence, and then they should follow through with the procedures. And again, that's coming from a former cop from Mendocino County who's talking about that's how he would investigate it. And the fact that she's contacted so many law enforcement agencies and they have not been doing that is very bizarre to him. And I also think that that's very bizarre that they wouldn't use that type of method. Part of me is even wondering, maybe they did. Okay, it hasn't reached Trent James when he was at Mendocino County, but part of me is wondering, maybe they did do that and they just didn't find anything. It got to the point where they took John Charles Trefil's DNA and they ran it against a cold case that Galina claims he was responsible for, a murder in the 1970s that she claimed he committed, and he also did not turn up as a match for that. But here's another point, and this is something that's really bothering me. And I know some of you guys have left some comments about this, about how if Galina is claiming that her father was the Zodiac Killer and the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer, in her own personal statement, which I read off on Monday, she stated that she thinks that he was responsible for the Zodiac murders, the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slaying murders, but she wants to focus on the crimes that occurred in Mendocino County. And I was just thinking, who on earth wants to accuse somebody of being the Zodiac Killer as an afterthought? Who on earth wants to accuse the Zodiac Killer, accuse their father of being the Zodiac Killer just as a minor detail of footnote? Oh yeah, by the way, he was also the Zodiac. Yeah, of course, there are people out there that have developed these types of connections. For example, Steve Hodel has accused his father, George Hill Hodel, of being the Black Dahlia Avenger and the Zodiac Killer, but he doesn't say it as an afterthought. He wrote an entire book about his father being the Zodiac Killer called Most Evil Part 2. And I mean, I think that that's one of the clearest examples. There are also people who accuse Ted Kaczynski of being the Unabomber and the Zodiac Killer. And again, the Zodiac angle is not an afterthought. He has been convicted for the Unabomber murders. He was convicted before he passed away, but he is definitely not just like, oh yeah, by the way, he was also the Zodiac Killer. But I don't want to talk about that right now. I want to talk about cold cases from Mendocino County in the 1970s. I'm just like, now, wait a second, wait a second. Did he actually do this or not? Are you just going to post your mumbling audio recordings on YouTube and get everyone to accept that? I don't quite think so. And a big problem that I have with that is that I'm not going to lie to you, that gives me some con man vibes. It's like when Dennis Kaufman came forward with Jack Torrance as a Zodiac Killer suspect, and immediately from the absolute first TV appearance that I saw from him, I thought about con man vibes, when he's just saying that he has a knife with something on it that looks like blood, and I don't know what it is, but it might be something. Con man vibes. And then Dennis Kaufman would go on to release photos of the crime scenes, which he claimed that he had. He claimed that Jack Torrance had taken photos of these crime scenes, and they were just blurry images where you couldn't make anything out. And I was thinking, con man vibes. And I don't know Galina Trefil well enough to say that she's a con woman or she's just making this up. I mean, I don't have that ability. I also have not heard extensive interviews that she has done. No one has made a documentary about her as of yet, to the best of my knowledge, so I can't evaluate her character. But the fact that she's putting out these audio recordings on YouTube that are just absolutely inaudible, that gives me a lot of room for doubt. But what do you think about John Charles Trefil as a Zodiac Killer suspect? And I do admit, even after all of that stuff that I said, I do think he has a very strong resemblance to the composite sketch. I do think that he really resembles the Zodiac Killer's facial descriptions. I know the composite sketch isn't perfect, but that is one of the closest matches that I have ever seen. And speaking of suspects that I think actually do heavily resemble the Zodiac Killer's composite sketch that was drawn after the Presidio Heights shooting, there's one that I've talked about only from time to time, and his name is Richard Ralph Mangan, and he is a suspect that has been proposed by Ray Penrod, and there's actually a very big set of stories that is connected as to how Ray Penrod obtained this information, and I don't even have the ability to tell you all of them because Ray hasn't gone public yet. But I received this email. Once again, anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. And if you think that I've been a little bit tough on Galina Trefil, probably will get a lot tougher right now. And this one says that liars are usually thieves. You mentioned my name with an edge of dislike and disrespect after I gave you a gift. And this is something that I'm just really kind of surprised about. You mentioned my name with an edge of dislike and disrespect. Well, how exactly should I respond to someone's suspect profile? How exactly should I respond to someone's claims that they have identified the Zodiac Killer? Do you just want me to hold your hand through the whole thing? Do you just want me to pretend that I think that you have credible evidence when I don't think that? I mean, I try my best to be as honest as I can without being overly mean or just without coming across as someone who is just trying to tear other people's material apart, but rather by evaluating things in, again, the fairest way possible. So with this suspect, Richard Ralph Mangan, I mean, there is a set of stories that I did want to hear about, because Ray Penrod says that he knew this man individually. He knew him personally. He was his cellmate in San Quentin prison for 3 months, and he was able to obtain the information that Richard Ralph Mangan was the Zodiac Killer. And at first I thought the story was going to be arranged as, all right, he was his cellmate and he confessed to him while he was in the cell that he was the Zodiac, but he actually seems like he obtained the confession from another person who was a previous cellmate of Richard Ralph Mangan. But my biggest problem that has never been addressed is that I can't seem to find out who this Ralph Mangan is that he is talking about. There is a photo that Ray Penrod provided, which, as I said, does heavily resemble the Zodiac's composite sketch. One of the most similar matches. Like if you were to do an age progression of the Zodiac's composite sketch, then that's what I think the Zodiac would look like. And he claims that this is his suspect, Richard Ralph Mangan. But the birth dates that he provided for this individual are different than the Ralph Mangan who looks identical to him, who passed away on a different year. And in 2023, I openly gave Ray Penrod an open invitation to come on Black Box Online Radio or to talk to me offline. All right, you're posting all these things. Well, why don't you just tell me your story? I mean, you're saying that you want to get this story out there. Once again, here's your opportunity. And that's just, the response that I get. Hey, you talked about me on a recent podcast with an edge of dislike and disrespect. Well, if I genuinely don't agree with your findings, or I have some genuine doubts about your findings, I mean, I haven't heard the whole story yet. Maybe disagreement is the wrong word. But if I have causes for suspicion, if I have reasons to think that maybe there's something fishy going on, maybe that there's some type of incorrect information here, or furthermore, I don't understand why some people are being so secretive and holding information back, yes, I'm going to talk about that on Black Box Online Radio, and it's not going to be something where I'm just going to bite my tongue and wait for you to put your information out in your own way, because you don't get to put stuff out on the internet and just tell other people. You don't get to talk about it. You don't get to talk about it until I say so, whether it's writing Facebook posts or making their own YouTube videos or even posting on forums. You don't get to just throw that stuff out on the internet and say, all right, well, no one else can talk about this until I'm ready for them to talk about it. That's not how life works. That's not how freedom of speech works. And that's also not how the evaluation of true crime material works. And I think that most people are aware of that. It's just it just doesn't come across as convenient to everyone. And now moving on to the next story here on the Zodiac Killer News Report. There's a series of videos on the channel SoCal Fan Thumbs, and it talks about the Zodiac Killer mystery in a lot of different ways. It pays a lot of attention to the Zodiac ciphers, and there are some of them that I couldn't really comment on too much, such as, was the Zodiac Killer a Leo, going with the astrological angle, and I've talked about astrology a little bit here on Black Box Online Radio. I even mentioned the Forensic Astrologer channel once, but overall I try to stay away from that particular subject for BBOR. But there was a video that came out on SoCal Phantoms that I actually think was very interesting, called Zodiac Killer's Modus Operandi Revealed, within the 340 and 408 ciphers. One more time, Zodiac Killer's Modus Operandi Revealed. And what this talks about is, by combining symbols from the Zodiac's first cipher, the 408, and from the 340, then you will be able to create a message that is going to reveal the word kill. And this is done with place values, a very, very intricate system, but this is one more time on the channel SoCal Fan Thumbs. Another update is, last year on the channel I did a book discussion on Zodiac Letters, Edward Wayne Edwards by Jason Hughes, and that was on Volume 1. There will be a new volume called, well, just that, Zodiac Letters, Edward Wayne Edwards, Volume 2 coming out, and I will be discussing that in the near future here on Black Box Online Radio. And next, there is a new video that is out on the YouTube channel Prospect Creek that is going to be talking about the Zodiac Killer's Z13 ciphers. I told you guys that I was discussing the ciphers a lot recently, and with the Z13, it's called the Zodiac Killer Z13 cipher. That's the full name of the video on the channel Prospect Creek. And this is one that, I'm not going to lie to you, I had to watch about 5 or 6 times before I could even begin to understand it. And then I noticed that there actually was a set of instructions to the video down at the bottom. But with the Zodiac Killer's symbols that are used in the cipher, we have, of course, the AEN, then there's a Zodiac symbol, there's a circled 8, the letter K, a circled 8, the M, a circled 8, what appears to be an anchor, or could be an Aries sign or a small W, and then NA and M. And the ultimate solution to this cipher is going to be Alan Killer Lee. And as I was watching this for the 6th time, I finally saw what Prospect Creek was doing by taking the 8s and then moving them down to A and N. Now, the most famous Zodiac Killer suspect is, of course, Arthur Lee Allen. I've already mentioned him in this episode. He comes up very frequently on the Zodiac Killer News Report, and I've even looked at this and thought about this back in early 2020, where you have AE and N, and then the prime suspect in the Zodiac Killer mystery's name is Alan. Couldn't there be some way to drag down some of the symbols and fill it in with the double L's? And I was using that symbol that I called the anchor or the Aries by separating it into 2 and then moving the L's over to get the name Allen, but this one actually uses the circled eights. And as I said, there is a set of instructions, and there's also using place values. If you do watch this video, there'll be things like +5 and -6. That means like 5 from the left and 6 from the right. So that's how those work. And those place values can be arranged. And then you add the result to a new circle and roll the circle horizontally. So by making numeric combinations using the place values, you can get Allen Killer Lee. And this is also focusing on the word kill. But you know what? This isn't the first time that people have found the word kill in some of the Zodiac's communications. Kevin Robert Brooks, who has Donald Lee Booyock as a Zodiac Killer suspect, has also looked at the Exorcist letter and looked at some of the symbols that were at the bottom of it. And he's talked about how those symbols, which have not been decoded to this day, might very well mean to kill. They can be rearranged to show to kill, because in the Exorcist letter it talks about how the Zodiac is saying, "I will do something nasty which you know I'm capable of," to kill. This was also discussed by Don and Betty Hart, the two people who solved the Zodiac Killer's Z408 cipher, when they said that one of the things that helped them was to find the double L, because they expected that that would be for kill. And of course, the first letter in the 408 was I, so you had I, and then the double L, and then kill, and that really aided them with their discussions. But one more time, if you would like to see this solution to the Z13 cipher, it is available on the channel Prospect Creek. And right now I would like to give a shout out to James Jilks, who runs Serial Killer Magazine. He's another person whom I've had the opportunity to correspond with and talk to, and Serial Killer Magazine is something that I first learned about in a Facebook group called the Zodiac Killer Library, and it talks about all different types of serial killers. And when we say magazine, it's not actually done in the traditional glossy copy magazine that you would think that might have a staple binding. This is actually a very large book-style publication, and it comes out on the channel serialkillercalendar.com, the website serialkillercalendar.com, but this is a magazine, and it covers various different stories. And I think that James Jilks and I have entered into some similar territory where people begin to wonder, why the focus on serial killers? Why all these discussions about serial killers? Are you just glorifying the morbidity? With somebody like the Zodiac Killer, are you glorifying the persona of the Zodiac? And his response to that was very simple. He just said, no, absolutely not. It's about learning what makes them tick. And it's also about learning about human behavior and psychology, and that was just music to my ears, because that's what I talk to you guys about here on Black Box Online Radio. That's what I talk to you guys about, because I've always said, though, like, if we want to learn about psychology, we have to learn everything. And I do explore a lot of subjects that are not serial killer related, that I don't discuss here on Black Box Online Radio, because they aren't relevant to the true crime cases. But as far as the glorification of murder or anything like that, I really found that even though Serial Killer Magazine is very colorful, it has some very powerful illustrations, and it features the killers in the forefront, it really is not glorifying them. Because another thing that I think James Jilks and I understood, or we had some type of similar connection with, is I don't like serial killers. I talk about them every week, sometimes every day, when I release shorts and reels here on YouTube or on Facebook or BlackBoxNet88 on Instagram. I don't like serial killers. I talk about this stuff. It's the same way that maybe a janitor doesn't like cleaning toilets, or it's the same way that a groundskeeper might not like picking up trash. It is something that people do. It's something that is work, but I do explore psychology, and there are parts of psychology that I really do like exploring, like self-help, like the way that people can improve their lives. I can say that I enjoy that, but I don't enjoy reading stories about how people are shot to death, how they're stabbed to death at Lake Berryessa, or the way that Jack the Ripper mutilated his victims. Instead, it's just about learning not only psychology, but also history at a certain point. But if you'd like to see more about serial killers magazine one more time, you can get it at serialkillercalendar.com. And again, it's very, very well composed, and there's some very shocking images. It's not done in a cozy way, but it's definitely done in an engaging way that is meant to get your attention. And you can always, weigh in the comment section down below if you have any ethical reservations about things like serial killers, about is there too much glorification of a serial killer on YouTube? Do people think too highly of a murderer? Well, absolutely. The people who fall in love with murderers think too highly of them, those women throwing themselves at Ted Bundy. And in the 21st century, it goes so far beyond Ted Bundy. We have people throwing themselves at Bryan Kohberger. He has just become an absolute obsession for the internet. And now it's that Luigi guy who murdered the United Health CEO that people are just developing these types of obsessions with them. And some people think it's because women have fascinations with dangerous men. And there is that element, but that's really not everything. That is really not the heart and soul of it. I think that it's more about the publicity. It's also about attraction to physical appearances. It's about how they recognize that there might be some type of problem that they think that they can be the savior for. But that first starts with initial moments of attraction, and then they want the connection. And also they are projecting their own traumas onto somebody else who has been publicized. So I think that it's all of those factors that come in together, and that's bad. That's bad because that's just traumatic experiences being amplified and expanded, and people are doing very bad things, and they're using this type of convicted murderer or murderer on trial like Bryan Kohberger as a scapegoat for their own feelings. But what do you think about any of the things that have been discussed? You can weigh in on that one. And the final thing that I have for you is, again, something that I do in the tradition of true crime talk radio. As I said, I often begin those shows with the crime talk points, but another thing I discuss very frequently is Radio Reddit, because it's a channel that I've been following very closely, and it's definitely one of the easiest ones on the ears to listen to. And I was listening to psychologists who have found patients that have bothered them, or it really was psychologists, when did you judge a patient when you shouldn't have? And somebody gave a very general response by saying that, of course you're going to deal with stories of violence. Of course you're going to deal with stories that will shock you. You're going to have a patient who was a police officer who was abusing his powers as a member of law enforcement, but that's not the most shocking thing about being in the therapist situation where someone is listening to people talk. This anonymous psychologist said the most shocking thing was that it's just so mind-boggling how people can go from being an ordinary functioning member of society to becoming a murderer. How people can cross that line from being law-abiding to homicidal, and it doesn't take that much. When people are just put under even some stressful circumstances, when there are very basic stressors in the average person's life that can drive them to homicide, it's not like the absolute worst things possible. No, it's just that the line between ordinary law-abiding citizen and homicidal serial killer is extremely thin. And then that's what I will leave you guys with. Not the most cheerful ending, but as I said, that's what we talk about in the true crime world. Sometimes there are going to be stories that are not cheerful, and sometimes, you do have to share what you honestly think. And I mean, I think that person was being very honest by putting all that information forward. But I'd love to know what you think about anything in this episode. Once again, this was a bonus Zodiac Killer news report for the week of April. Oh goodness, we are in April now. This is April 3rd. Well, the last one came out in March, and now we are back in April of 2025. Okay, well, hope you had a wonderful April Fool's Day. I hope you had some good pranks that were thrown around, or at the very least, you watched some good television. I watched The Simpsons April Fool's episode about 2 or 3 times, actually, in clip form. But anyway, please put your ideas in the comment section down below. Anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and you can download this show anywhere you get your podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, under the names Black Box True Crime or Black Box Podcast. You can also support this channel at buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and anybody who makes a donation or contribution will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday, and of course BlackBoxNed88 on TikTok and Instagram for Reels. That is all for me now, and I'll see you tomorrow talking about D.B. Cooper. Good.